So welcome to the seminar, which is with Alistair Hudson, Honorary Professor of Useful Arts here in the Department of Art History and Cultural Practices at the University of Manchester. And Alistair, you have come to talk to us today about something that I know is very close to your heart and ours, which is a forthcoming piece of work and exhibition with Suzanne Lacy. Just before I hand over to you, I just wanted to let people know that Suzanne is going to be a visiting professor here at the department next year in connection with this work that Alice is going to talk to you about. So we're going to be welcoming her as a visiting Simon professor to the department, and there'll be lots of opportunities next year to engage closely with the work and with Suzanne Lacy herself, with the artist. So look out for details of those, which will be coming your way soon. Without further ado, I want to pass over to Alistair to hear what he has to tell us. And as I said earlier, there'll also be time for questions and comments about the seminar. And you can also, if you want, put questions into the chat in the usual Zoom fashion. And then we can pick them up later. So if you've got any questions or comments and you want to put them in the chat, then we can also pick them up at the end of Alistair's talk. So over to you, Alistair. Please share your screen and work away.
Great, thanks very much, Abby, and hello everybody. Thanks for taking time out in your day for this. I am actually speaking to you from the new Office of Useful Art, or Arte Util, which is our new space here at the Whitworth, which is kind of open common room hangout research centre for Arte Util, which is a digital online archive that we are now in our collection, and the core of the thinking of the Whitworth going forward. But it's a space that you can all come and use on a regular basis and hang out in, and it's also my public office of sorts as well, so you can come along and see me here as well, and other members of the team. But it's also, in a way, it's a kind of launch pad for this exhibition that we are embarking on with Suzanne Lacy, and I'm going to talk to you specifically about that today. But it did come out of the work that I'd been doing for many years around Arte Util, useful art, social practice, basically this idea of art working in the world of operations rather than the world of representations. Maybe we could touch upon that later on. But I'm going to present to you. It's going to be quite informal, this presentation, because I'm going to toggle between PowerPoint images, Suzanne's website, and some films as well, to try and keep it entertaining as much as I can. So I'm going to start, if I can share screen, if I can get this to work. Let's see, how's that? Yeah, if we go to another second, I told you I'll keep it informal. So here we are, here's Suzanne's website. And as I say, the origins of this exhibition go back to about 2017, when I was in San Francisco working with Tanya Bruguera on the Escuela de Arte Útil at YBCA in San Francisco, which was an exhibition of Tanya's work, and where we also ran a school to try and teach the methodologies of useful art, or this kind of social practice, to students in the Bay Area. And simultaneously, across the road at SF MoMA, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, they were planning a major retrospective of the work of Suzanne Lacy. And Suzanne, you can explore her work in more detail on her website, but I kind of would refer to her in a way as the grand dame of social practice, who's been operating since the 1960s, initially in the US, but later around the world, particularly in Europe and in South America as well. basically developing a body of work and a methodology that comes very much out of community organising. And that trajectory of where Suzanne comes from is in that tradition of kind of 60s community organising, of performance, and of and feminist art practice as well in the States as well, very much interlinked with you know, whole roster of artists we're probably all very familiar with now. But in that process of discussing the potential for this exhibition, we held a conference, and the question really was, how do you do an exhibition of social practice for an artist like Suzanne, whose work is really not made for galleries on the whole, but work is primarily made as process, working with people, organising communities in order to get something done, in order to achieve something. Although her work comes out of performance, so often there is an element of spectacle to it as well, which is part of the delivery mechanism to enable some kind of social change. So in that discussion, we were kind of thinking about how we might do this. And 2 years later, these are some images here I can show you of the exhibition of Suzanne's work at SF MoMA, which was in a way curated very much as a visual entity and as a kind of closed entity as well, where it kind of tells the story of her work, you know, going back to those kind of, you know, collective actions by feminist artists in the 1960s and the 70s, and through to work, you know, right up to the present day as well. So it very much was in the tradition of showing the material produced by the artist in the frame of an art gallery. But for me, the challenge in a way was the potential to miss an opportunity in actually paying true justice to the work of an artist who is, you know, kind of out there working in the world. And for me, the question was, well, how can you get an exhibition to also work out there in the world, rather than it being just, you know, hermetically sealed as a body of work with with effectively no action. So in thinking through how we might do this exhibition, we started to talk to Suzanne about how we might, in a way, think about the show as a delivery vehicle for new projects, or to inspire projects. Or actually, if we were thinking still about a retrospective, how could we use historic work in the present and actually to bring it alive and make it function in the world around us, to really demonstrate what's at the core of this work. And her exhibition also was shown across the road at YBCA. Here's some of the, this is the Yerba Buena Center for Contemporary Art, which is directly across the street from SF MoMA. And amongst the work shown there was a significant body of work, which really kind of, I think, brought Suzanne to global prominence, which was a body of work undertaken in the 1990s over a period of a decade, called Oakland Projects. And this was essentially responding to the crisis in Oakland, which is a neighborhood, you know, in the Bay Area, you know, across the water from, you know, the kind of main glamorous center of the city, a neighborhood obviously with significant Black communities, and with it all the complexities that we're familiar with in urban situations. And Oakland Projects was really designed as a way to use art to give agency to Black youth in this neighborhood, where there were some very serious issues around gang culture, gun crime, violence, and a very hostile environment with the police. And really, this 10-year program of work, which was evolved in a number of different locations and situations, was really about, I suppose, creating a curriculum to teach media literacy to these young people, but as a way to give them voice and a way to get themselves heard, which in the long run might affect policy change in the city and actually create better pathways for them as they go forward. And I'm going to show you now, if I can, what I'll probably have to do is stop sharing that and find another video to give you a taste of the work that was produced. So I'm going to play this. The sound okay?
I haven't had a single positive experience in my life. So I'm supposed to tell you the truth. I couldn't be around police where I was done turning.
In 10 years as a police officer, I have never seen a police officer hit a person that's been handcuffed. I'm not saying that that does not happen. Obviously, it happens, but I have never seen it.
It happened in Riverside to a young girl. What are you talking about? That never happened. I get shot down. I get shot down. Now, because you're a cop and because you made a mistake that I was reaching for something and because you ran my name and 4 years ago, I have something on my record. I got shot and it's okay. You may not even lose your job. And that's how you're above the law. You can't, and you have to admit that.
Let me give you an example. A decorated cop, all right? 15 years in the force, kicking ass. The whole 15 years he's on.
The whole 15 years.
Meaning he's been making, hey, that's right. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a good cop. I didn't say he was doing anything against him. I'm talking about a good cop. 15 years on the streets, all right? Everybody knows him. Everybody likes him in the department. Citizens like, he goes out there and makes a mistake like that. What do you think should happen to him? Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. That's your attitude, though. Hey, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. A good cop like that probably has 10 more years on the streets. He makes one freaking mistake. That's how people are. Screw him, get him out of there.
15 years on the street kicking ass, whatever, right? He makes one mistake, but we're on the streets and we make one mistake, and what happens to us?
Make one mistake, meaning what? One mistake about what?
25 to a hell.
I don't understand what you mean.
Like breaking the law.
She's saying if young people break the law, they don't get a second chance.
That's not true. That is not true.
Especially not young.
That is
Not
not
true at all.
true.
We just got done. We got your links here on a case where a guy just paroled after doing what 3 years for murder. He did 3 years for murder. Okay, so there are second chances.
Okay, so that gives you kind of an idea of the sort of films that came out of that process, where basically Suzanne employed a kind of common strategy that she does, which is about this setting up situations for deep listening to communities about the issues, about their concerns, and facilitating conversations out of which a kind of structured strategy can be made to develop the situation in a positive way. So in a way, all these films and videos, had a significant effect on policy and attitudes and relationships between young people and the police, and on the education system in Oakland as well. And this was presented at YBCA basically as a kind of multi-screen video installation with archive and so on. And it struck me that in a way what was being produced here was not only a curriculum that Suzanne had devised with these communities and the kind of other artists and agents in this situation, but in a way it was a kind of curriculum for a way of for disseminating this work and for kind of in a way reproducing this work in different ways. And so the way that the conversation between me and Suzanne evolved about the idea of if we were to do an exhibition or version of a retrospective or a version of the show at Whitworth, that we could think about the show as a kind of curriculum in itself or a manual. for how we might develop this exhibition. So on the one hand, you would present historic work, but you would use that as a template, as a platform to also begin that deep listening process in Manchester, and to begin that process of asking, well, what issues can we address now? What can we do? And to instigate new projects in Manchester on the back of this historic work, taking inspiration and strategies from it. So that was really evolving, in a very exciting way. And then, of course, COVID hit us in the middle of all this, and all kinds of austerity complications, which meant that the show had to be delayed. But obviously, it was now rescheduled for opening at the end of this month. It opens on the 26th of November. But through that time, we also rethought the show as well, that it shouldn't necessarily just be this retrospective of historic work, but we should really focus in on what matters now in Manchester, and what works were relevant to the situation now, and particularly in the post-COVID situation, and to develop works that really were about playing our part in rebuilding the city after the pandemic, when so many fissures in society, so many kind of imbalances and ruptures had been exposed by this 18-month period plus, in terms of race, in terms of health inequalities, so on and so forth. So we settled on the idea of really presenting 4 major works of Suzanne's to cover, in a way, 4 major subject areas that we thought we could make some progress in. And it was also inspired, this idea, by the fact that in this process of working out how we were going to do the show and how we were going to present it, Suzanne was contacted by a community leader in Moss Side, who runs an organisation to try and get Black youth out of gang culture and into better life pathways and education right here on our doorstep. And he contacted Suzanne to say, hey, I saw this project you did called Oakland Projects back in the 90s. It looks amazing. Could you come and do something like that here? Not knowing that 500 meters down the road, the Whitworth was planning an exhibition and possibly a project around this work, right here. So really that started the idea that not only should we show Oakland projects, but we should, in a way, try and remake or redo or rethink Oakland projects for Manchester now. So in a way, that sort of created the kind of the concept of the superstructure for the exhibition, that we could, on the one hand, show Oakland projects in in its kind of full installation mode, but use that in a way as a classroom, and to extend that and use the whole Whitworth as a classroom, and to use it as a convening space, which I think museums are ultimately, to bring people together from South Manchester, and to work with these community groups and these young people to try and make a new version of Oakland projects that would teach media literacy, but possibly also visual literacy, in order to give them agency in the city. It's a different time. We're living in the age of the internet now, and visual culture is very different. There isn't a kind of car culture or quite the aggressive kind of youth versus police situation that you have in Oakland, although there are some elements to that here, and is of considerable concern. So really that's one of that kind of, in a way, set us up with this template for the idea of how we would construct the exhibition around these projects, and then to see how they could then be developed through the exhibition itself as a platform to develop projects that would also try and create policy change in the city. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through the other 3 projects that we're going to be showing, and then talk a little bit after that about how we're going to tie all this up and actually bring it into the realm of action. So I'm going to switch now to PowerPoint mode, if I can. Let's try this. So here's the promo material for the exhibition, and the exhibition is called "What Kind of City?" ? A Manual for Social Change. So developing this exhibition as a kind of live work in process, which asks this question: how after COVID, how after austerity, how in this moment we're in, can we build a city that is actually worth living in? And in a way, the next project I'm going to show is actually a work that is a little bit closer to home, because Suzanne does have a history of working in the UK. She has a long relationship with the culture scene in this country. I think for a large part because social practice is kind of quite well advanced in the UK because of its kind of publicly funded culture scene, rather than the States where it's kind of everything's heavily privatized and corporatized. But the project she did a few years ago, where I actually first met Suzanne, was a commission in Briarfield, a mill town at the foot of Pendle Hill, which was a kind of a classic post-industrial situation where you have these enormous mills from the cotton industry, which were kind of fading and dying out, and obviously a population of South Asian diasporas, and a kind of the classic what's now the red wall, of the north. And in this situation, Suzanne was commissioned to make a piece of work with these communities, in a way with this kind of what's referred to as the traditional white working class communities, which I think this is up for debate, and the kind of the emerging communities, or apparently new communities of South Asian descent, and how basically you create a sense of community and a healthy culture with a full understanding of each other, and how you can kind of rebuild in a town in this kind of environment. So the mill itself obviously was an old, like many of these places, an old cotton mill, and Suzanne, as she does, began this process of deep listening, usually around a large meal with members of the community invited to get the conversations going, to kind of listen to one another, listen to each other's concerns. And through that process, a kind of a storyline started to emerge, and that was really about the idea of creating often in negotiation, it can be carried out through process and ritual, you might say. And what emerged as the project was to kind of bring two cultural traditions together and merge them as a vehicle to have those conversations. So in a way, what started to develop was the idea of a musical performance, which would effectively hybridize Sufi chanting, from which was kind of dominant tradition there in the South Asian communities, and merge that with kind of UK tradition of shape note singing, which is a kind of another form of chanting, and to bring those two things together, and through that process also tell the stories of these people's stories, of people who lived and worked in the mill, and people who came from elsewhere to work in these places, and really start to tell a kind of a more complicated, richer story of how this came to be and how it might grow beyond that. Because of course, a lot of the discourse we have at the moment is about these communities coming here for, cheap labor, for example, or, there's a mythology that gets told around why culture changes, why people move. And actually the reality is that in the 19th century, the mill owners wanted to mechanize their mills. And the workers rebelled, the unions resisted because they thought they'd all be out of a job if we brought the machines in. So all the machinery was then really redirected to South Asia, where they developed a mechanized textile industry. And then, of course, at a certain point in the 19th century, all the mill owners around Manchester realized that they had to mechanize whatever to keep up with global competition. So they had to import not the labor, but the expertise back from South Asia and the machinery that had been, by at that stage, highly developed in the Indian subcontinent. So really, the true matter of these migrations is about the import of expertise and of knowledge, and of them imparting and sharing that, rather than the discourse that often gets rolled out. So in a way, mixed in with this project is that storytelling of kind of the truth of complexity of how culture works and how societies are formed. And it culminated basically in a large-scale performance of this choral singing that was then filmed and becomes effectively a large-scale video installation, which was has now actually been acquired by the Whitworth and as a joint acquisition with SF MoMA. And what I will do, there's some images of basically you've got the circle, which is the formation for Sufi chanting, and the square formation, which is the shape note formation for singing. And then I will show you, if I can come out of this, I can show you a little video clip. Hopefully you'll be able to see this.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the circular square. I'll park that there for the moment, and I will go back to our presentation and go on to the next project, which is called Across and In Between, which is a commission that was made in 2018 as part of the 1418 celebrations, and it was a commission in Ireland. And this project Suzanne was invited to do was really working with all the communities who live along the border of Northern Ireland and Éire, and trying to understand what the future would behold in a post-Brexit situation, and really start to interrogate the idea of what a border is, how it functions, and what it means to the people who actually live in and around it. So the project involved about 300 people from communities who all lived a lot, kind of in and around this border, with the intention of again making a large-scale film installation, which would then in effect be used and would be screened at the Ulster Museum in 2018, accompanied by a kind of a dinner and a presentation at Stormont, in which people's voices could be heard and in which they could basically make their requests for how they saw the way that Ireland could operate in this post-Brexit situation, resulting in the end of a presentation of a manifesto, the Yellow Manifesto, with this idea of the kind of the yellow line operating between the north and the south, and really as a kind of request, a call to say, listen to the people who live here. Borders are something that is imposed, and how can we actually make a better way of living that allows for this complexity and allows for us to kind of all live and work together and so on. So I'll show you the film of that, which again will be presented in one of the main galleries. Screen share. There's a lot of toggling. Never done so much toggling in a presentation. Here we go. You see that?
Like there was trouble forming the border. You know what I mean? There was
getting the land area.
The Castle Sanderson was Sanderson's, right? He was an MP. He was an Ulster Unionist MP. But when the line was drawn, he ended up in the south, and he tried to get it changed, but it didn't. It didn't work,
So it's Castle Sanderson's right on the border, but it's also
Yes.
an international peace centre.
It is.
Because it's a striking place, because you have there the enormous ruin of Castle Sanderson House, which, like a lot of big houses in Ireland,
Completely destroyed. Yeah.
And there you are, like a phoenix, in the Scout Centre, and the shadow of it, though. It's an extraordinary place.
It is.
Kayaking along the Castle Sanderson River. I didn't see it. I didn't find the border.
What does the border look like?
Yellow. Was it? I think we were told it was yellow. I didn't find it. I think it was yellow too.
This generation that we work with wouldn't know, what the border was like.
We were actually dragged at times through the rivers on rope to get to school, maybe coming home. That's seriously. I remember my dad throwing a rope across the river to pull us home.
And I was talking to a farmer once. He had to travel 16 miles and his farm was split by the river. He could see his cattle on the far side in the north, but he had to travel all that distance because his crossing point had been blocked off because there was an incident on the border.
Okay, and then this film is actually then woven together into a very large scale. I think it's the largest projection we've ever done at Whitworth, which is going to fill one gallery. Very spectacular, beautiful, eloquent film about life along the border, and that will be kind of make our third room at Whitworth, and then down the road at Manchester Art Gallery. We'll be presenting the fourth project, which again comes out of a historic work, you might say, which was a commission in 2013 with Suzanne Lacy for a Hans Ulrich Obrist show. Really, it was a show of performance that he did in 2013, and the project Suzanne did there was called Cleaning Conditions, which analysed basically the labour conditions under which the different classes operating in the gallery operated, and really picking up on this idea. Conversations emerged as we were developing the show about the predicament of older women in the city. Basically, women. This is women over 50 in the city, and particularly where that demographic intersects in terms of race and in terms of class, and basically the disparities that are existent around work, stability, working rights, health inequalities, and basically ability for older women in the city to have a stake in how the city is run. So Suzanne, basically working with the team at the gallery, convened this amazing group of community leaders to lead on this project. And this was all through lockdown. So for 2 years, pretty much Suzanne has been meeting every week, every Wednesday, for an hour with the Uncertain Futures group to develop this project, which has resulted in a collaboration with the Social Sciences Department at the university to do a body of research to really understand the conditions of what it's like to be an older woman living and working in the city, about the inequalities they are subject to, and particularly in the light of the pandemic and COVID. And really the idea is to organize this group and to undertake research in the gallery, to use the gallery as a vehicle for research, looking at this intersectionality, and basically use this evidence to campaign for policy change within the city. So this is a real direct outcome that the project is seeking, to reach out to people and to bring them into the gallery, into this space. So alongside, this is Ford Madox Brown's work in the show being shown alongside the film of Cleaning Conditions. And then adjacent to that is basically a recording studio in which over the last months has been used to record stories of women in the city and their experiences, and to build that together as a compelling case that allows us to ask for changes to conditions and to policy around working rights, around pensions, around health, and around the way we look after all members of our society. So this is actually on now. You can go. This has been open since the summer at Manchester Art Gallery, so it's actually working and operating, and will in a way also be part of the exhibition that we're doing with Suzanne. So in a way, this is spread literally across the city in a show that is actually addressing the city. So in a way, I've given you kind of an idea of what those 4 projects are, but what we want to do now is to begin that process. So the exhibition opens next week. In fact, on Thursday night, we've got 100 people coming down in coaches from Briarfield, and we're going to have the choir singing in the gallery at the opening, and also a new Nasheed boys choir, which is a new young person's choir made to start anew this kind of sense of community collaboration. And I suppose the idea is with that project to infect how we also think and work in this city as well, and working with our South Asian communities around us here in Moss Side, Fallowfield, etc., on our doorstep. who we know are also calling for better rights, for better living conditions as well, and in terms of creating pathways into education and so on as well. So what we have is basically a template of 4 projects that cover 4 themes. We have youth agency with open projects, where that project will be developed through the gallery spaces and through the city, hopefully to influence change around the curriculum in the city, and to enable young people to get out of their closed circuits within their own communities and get better life pathways into education. The Circle and Square will be working with some of those communities in Briarfield, making connections with communities here on our doorstep, with partners, again, probably trying to look at new pathways into education there. The Across and In Between, it will be addressing the subject of borders, not just the border between Northern Ireland and the South, but also the invisible borders that we have in society, and particularly around the metropolitan centres versus the red wall towns, between rich and poor, between the haves and the have-nots, between old and young, between different communities, and to look at actually how we can redraw and complexify those borders so that actually you again make better conditions for living. And then uncertain futures will then also be addressing, as I said, quite directly the issues around ageing in the city as well. So really that then builds a total picture which will do the research and do the work over the period of the exhibition, and use the exhibition and the gallery as this convening space to have those discussions, and it will culminate in the spring with Suzanne's visiting professorship, where all those subjects will be brought together, and we will effectively make an ask to the city, to the policymakers, to the influencing classes, to the decision makers, about actually where we go next in this post-COVID world. So I'm going to stop there, because I've talked for 48 minutes now. So it leaves us a bit of time for questions if we've got any. But I'll just add that, just say, please come and see the exhibition, come and use it, get involved in the projects. In fact, on the afternoon of the 26th, we have a couple of panel discussions in the afternoon with Suzanne and with the people who are involved in making Cross and In Between film, and with some community leaders about those invisible borders in the city. So please come along to that as well. So shall I hand back to you, Abby, as Master of Ceremonies?
Thank you. Thanks very much, Alistair, and thanks for showing as well as telling us about Suzanne's work and what we can expect by visiting the exhibition at the Whitworth and also at Manchester Art Gallery. So we've got a question that has been asked in the chat, and I'm going to sort of extend that a little bit more, because I'm using chair's prerogative here, to kind of respond to some of the things that you've just said at the end of your talk. So the question is from Jenna Ashton, and she's asking about the exhibition and programme with the Whitworth and how they might be used to support local social practice and activist, communities for local artists. And then, so it's the longevity question. It's the question about, that social practice and projects like these often get asked around, kind of parachuting in, and what's the longer term legacy. And I just wanted to extend that a little bit because of the particular topics and issues that the projects that you've been describing and that we're going to be able to explore with Suzanne and through the exhibition, the themes that they're touching on, and particularly in light of COVID times. I've just popped out of a conference that I'm involved in from a project that's been looking at the impacts of COVID on arts and cultural sector. And one of the things that we have found through the research that we've been undertaking for 15 months, and also that we're discussing currently at the conference, is about the conditions of labour across, and the kind of the unequal conditions for labour. And I was just thinking, when you were talking about how much investment of time has needed to go on to bring Suzanne, and how she is able to undertake the kind of work she does because of all of the people working in arts and culture and getting the funding to bring an artist of her caliber over and to kind of support her own creative labour. And then I was thinking about you using the word convening, and that being a really important word in terms of how institutions like museums can convene communities and convene conversations. And so I just wanted to extend Jenna's question a little bit and ask you about, kind of how do we support the creative and actual labour of people who might be able to then continue convening conversations like that without the huge effort of bringing somebody like Suzanne in? What are the ways that we can do that, whether it's inside the institutional walls or within communities? How does this project kind of ripple onward, apart from potentially making policy change?
Yeah, well, I mean, this exhibition is also, in a way, it's designed to be a kind of catalyst, I suppose, and we're bringing Suzanne to be a kind of catalyst in this, and she's a good example of an artist who isn't particularly egotistical, and actually all her projects are driven by the people that work in them rather than her. She's a great organizer, but basically she sets up systems that run without her. That's the ambition. And in a way, it's the same with the Whitworth, that this is not just a show that comes and goes, but in a way creates the operating system for the Whitworth going forward. And in fact, that's in a way, that's the design of a lot of our exhibition program now going forward. It's about continually getting the Whitworth to work in these ways and to work with, genuine collaboration with groups, with issues that they come to us with, rather than us saying, hey, here's a cool project with a cool artist who wants to get involved. So, this group from our side approaching Suzanne directly is a good case in point around that. We also had, direct requests from South Asian communities around us as well, for us to work with them and so on and so forth. So this is really about addressing the immediate, which is kind of the methodology of RT O'Toole as well, is to address the urgencies. So not us dictating things, but people coming to us and using the Whitworth and its resources and artistic programs and artists and networks and, yes, money and fundraising to make those things happen. So that is the ambition, and there's kind of things attached to that as well. So some of you might have seen, we launched an NFT recently at the Whitworth as part of our economics project. And that, in a way, is kind of like a Robin Hood NFT, that all the proceeds from it are going into a kind of Whitworth community fund that will fund social projects. So it will have kind of direct public benefit rather than creating individual capital. So it will even hopefully be using some of that money raised so far on some of the community work that Suzanne will initiate. And the Office of RT O'Toole as well, when it's open, come and see it, because in a way that also is a way or is a mechanism to initiate new projects, to invite new projects in the city as well. And even to fund and facilitate those two. Okay, thank you. Jenna, does that answer your question? Because I realise I hijacked it slightly. So I don't know if you wanted to pick up on that. And then also after that, if there are any other questions, if people either want to raise their hands or put them in the chat or just alert me in some way.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks for that. Yeah, it was just, yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Suzanne's work. I think it's amazing work, and the kind of legacy of the projects can be felt in communities. And I think it's just this question of, very, very practically, will Suzanne and yourselves at the Whitworth be able to sit down with local social practice artists to kind of talk through some of this work and the kind of challenges and opportunities and say a little bit like Abby said about how to continue to embed this work more and more, because I think, particularly in Manchester, the big issues around housing and inequity and development, fuel poverty, food poverty, and artists are living within these communities. They are actually part of these communities, so they can really, and are doing already some great work. So what are the very practical mechanisms that artists can kind of be involved within these conversations in the programme? Cheers.
Yeah, I would say come and talk to us. I mean, Suzanne's here. She's around for the next week or so, and then she'll be back in the spring, but also we'll be in constant communication with her throughout the show. We've also created a new space called, the whole top floor of the Whitworth now is called the School of Creativity, and it's an open workshop space that came out of the Reno project as an idea. And that is a space where we've got artists in residence. Akua is working, I think you know, she's working through there at the moment. So we are working with artists, commissioning artists, having those conversations. So I think, I mean, in a way that I think that's the answer, is to just, the door's open. Come to, you know, we can't do everything in the world, but I think it's about convening those things and making stuff happen. So yeah, absolutely, practically. Yeah, I think that's again, it's that deep listening, isn't it? And often, you know, artists who work amongst these communities, as you say, are already doing this work and already, you know, doing that deep listening and working with communities. So I think it's just about joining some of these things up and using this, you know, big building as a convening space for that, and to amplify it and to give it, you know, give it voice.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else who would like to ask questions, big or small, while we have the opportunity now? Either unmute yourself or, because I can't see everyone, or just alert me via the chat. Okay, so Neve's asking, and feel free to ask yourself, Neve, if you like, but yeah, I think it's more about the building and how the space with the Whitworth is being used, and whether projects like this. And I've got a bit of an addendum to that as well, Neve, if you don't mind. In that I'm, as Alistair knows only too well, very interested in how the surroundings of the building and how the park for the Whitworth is being used, particularly given, you know, the kind of additional ways that parks were used over lockdowns and have become more valuable to everyday life, but perhaps still not significantly valued in terms of their investment. So how is this changing the kind of use of the building and these projects, and something about what's happening with Whitworth Park these days?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's I mean, what this is part of is a rethinking of how we use the spaces in the Whitworth, and essentially what we're trying to do, like this office of the space, this new space we're in now, is a kind of common room, or the School of Creativity on the first floor, or there's a new collections care centre being developed downstairs, and the park is kind of making the space that can be inhabited and lived in, rather than somewhere where you just come and act as a spectator. You can still do that, of course. You come and see exhibitions, you know, like you always did, but it's adding these extra layers and resources and facilities that allows for people to live through the building in a much more kind of regular day-to-day way, to then facilitate those conversations, you know, for example, the ones that, you know, Jenna was just talking about, or whether it's with particular communities who are encouraging them to use the building in new and different ways. And that extends to the park as well. So we do have some quite exciting projects lined up for the park, one of which I can't talk about, unfortunately, but maybe in a month. But also, you know, we're just about to build a new outdoor classroom in the park that's at the centerpiece of a community growing space garden. And that will allow us to hold outdoor events and food events, and you know, you can use it for lectures, or, you know, whatever it might be. So it's creating the park as a space to live in, connected, for example, with our health programs, which is a whole huge kind of you know, body of work that Whitworth does that isn't always visible, which is all the work, you know, with the NHS, with clinicians, with patients from across the road at the hospital, with local GP services, really developing the park and the gallery together as a site of, well, I don't like the word well-being. It's kind of a bit woolly, but actually it's health. it's about health, and actually a really solid strategic citywide program about how we deliver that. And I think the park plays a very important part in that, and the gallery does as well. And in fact, it's why they were made. That was the original intention for the Whitworth in 1889, as this kind of place to make people happier and healthier, as well as better at design. So yeah, a nicely rounded ending on the historical usefulness of the Whitworth Art Gallery and the park. We've come to time. I've just... Are you muted, Abby? Yeah, it's all right. There we go. I'm just putting the links into the chat of the exhibition for those who want to join us there. Look forward to some co-convening with everyone of conversations, and we can continue talking about this, but also just learning more about the work that Suzanne is going to be leading on, and the projects that have happened in the past, and meeting people that have been involved in them. Thank you so much for your time, everybody on this call, but also especially to Alistair for introducing us to what's coming up. It's very exciting. Yeah, we will share this recording somehow. I'll let you know how somehow. Afterwards, everybody take care and see you all soon. All right, thanks again. Everybody, see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.